Why are giant corporate landlords evicting people in the middle of a pandemic illegally? Judd Legum drops by to tell us all about it. Check it out, leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Well, this is Judd Legum. He's the founder of Popular.info and the former editor-in-chief of Think Progress. Popular.info is the website. And you can tweet him at Judd Legum, Juddlegum. And Judd, your newsletter a day or so ago, as you know, I've subscribed to it for a while. I recommend it to people fairly regularly. You just are doing some brilliant investigative reporting. 62 landlords who received $60 million in taxpayer bailouts, and now they are evicting tenants. Do I have that right?
That's pretty much right. I became interested in this because you did have the CDC on September 1st saying that there was a federal moratorium on evictions, which is pretty important because we're headed towards the winter. We're still in the middle of an economic crisis brought on by the pandemic. But what I found in my research is that a lot of new eviction cases are being filed in states all around the country. So then I started to look into who were the companies who were doing most of these filings, and many of them were the same companies that had gotten these what were called loans from the Paycheck Protection Program, but are actually just grants, money that the government has given them, really to stave off an economic collapse. But now these same companies are turning around a few weeks later and evicting people from their homes despite the existence of a federal moratorium.
Judd, I recall back in 2008 to 2009, as the housing crisis was, the subprime mortgage crisis exploded and turned into a housing crisis, and we were having mass evictions all over the United States. Steve Mnuchin in California was responsible for thousands, tens of thousands himself, with his company. I think it was Bank West. That there were American wealthy people who were buying up lots and lots of retail real estate. New businesses were starting just to manage these investment properties, essentially, on behalf of new people who wanted to be, kind of dynastic landlords. There were major operations coming out of China, Japan, and South Korea that were buying up property on the West Coast. I assume that there were, other perhaps Europeans buying East Coast property. There was kind of a realignment of who actually owned all of our housing. Do you have any sense how large that was? And I mean, here in Portland, there were signs on every telephone pole that said, we will buy your house for cash. And most of those you could track back to these Chinese companies. But how has that affect, or has that had any effect on this? Where did these companies come from? Who are they? And what percentage of our housing stock is now owned by a handful of these giant corporations or REITs?
Yeah, I do know that private equity firms have been becoming increasingly active in the rental housing market, and I do think that this plays into the dynamic we're seeing now, because before we had these large corporations controlling so many units, a lot of the people in my reporting, they own tens of thousands of rental units in 15 states or 20 states. Before, you had a one-on-one relationship with your landlord, and you were able to, if you landed on tough times, you're able to work things out and arrange partial payments or figure out how to kind of get through that rough patch and get back on your feet. Now you've got private equity, which is really just looking over how to make a return year over year over year, and you're really just a number. And if you're not paying your rent, you're not helping their numbers, and they want you out as soon as you can, and they'll backfill in with someone else. And that's the dynamic. So I do think it has changed. I do think the nature of rentals has changed. And, we're kind of seeing the consequence now. And actually, it's going to get worse in January, because while I was highlighting the people who are kind of not respecting the federal moratorium and are looking for loopholes and ways to get around it, there are some companies who aren't doing evictions now, but come January, when this expires, they will be. And people will owe all of this back rent as well, people who are unable to pay now.
And if Joe Biden is president, he's going to inherit an absolute screaming, flaming disaster as a consequence of that. I know that there was a lot of talk some months ago in California, particularly in the California press, largely out of the Bay Area, actually, about how this commodification of housing, or the financialization of housing, these giant companies buying up, hundreds or thousands of retail or residential, units, and then renting them out, and running them through management companies, or setting up their own internal management companies, was driving up housing prices and was making it harder and harder for people to buy single family homes because they were competing with these giant operations. And there was talk about, sort of like going back to the old radio TV rules pre-1996, where, a single company couldn't own more than 5 or 10 or 50 houses in a state, or 500 in a state, or 5 in a city, or something like that, and how that might really substantially change the housing landscape across the United States. I never saw any of that translated into legislation. I just, I read a lot of op-eds about it and letters to the editor and things like that. Is there a movement around that kind of thing of trying to clean up our residential housing situation in the United States? Or is this, is this new industry, do they have a trade association? Have they started buying politicians? Are they so entrenched that it's unlikely to ever happen? And would it even be a good idea?
Well, I think it would. There's obviously a lot of folks who are working on affordable housing, and I think especially in cities, there's a lot of people who are getting priced out, pushed out to the edges. I wouldn't say that right now those forces are being successful. I do think that the money is on one side, and there are a lot of politicians who sort of believe that increasing the prices of homes in their area up and up and up, will increase the tax base. And there's a lot of other conflicting impulses on the other side. But I do think that
Perverse
there is
incentives.
A crisis. Yeah, there is a crisis of housing affordability, and it was sort of lurking right beneath the surface. And what you're seeing now is, with the pandemic, it's exposing all of this. So what we have now is, and I've looked at estimates of up to 17 million families who are not going to be able to pay their rent. So something is going to have to give here, or we're going to have a huge crisis. And it's a crisis that could actually create another. It could worsen the overall economic landscape for everyone too. If you all of a sudden millions of people are without homes, they're not going to be able to keep a job. This is something that ultimately is going to impact everyone. And we're just
in our final minute here, Judd. Back to the companies, these 62 companies that got $60 million in taxpayer bailouts. Are there any efforts to hold these companies responsible for what's going on? Or are they going to get away with it the way Steve Mnuchin did back in the day?
Well, right now they're going to get away with it because what we did is we put together several $100 billion in bailouts, but there were no restrictions attached to that. So you could just take the money and then do what you will. You couldn't fire people who you were employed. You couldn't fire a big portion of the people you were employing. The money had to be spent on salaries, but there was nothing that prevented them from evicting people. So, maybe we can come in and backfill this or try to do something in the future, but as of right now, no.